breathing is extremely important, and having a breathing strategy while you're on stage, a lot of people don't consider that. And I've always been super conscientious of my waist because you're looked at every single moment. So understanding when you should be breathing, pacing yourself on stage.
That was always why I took my pictures out in the back garden, like John said.
Yeah.
We're in morning, like sunlight, like just low daylight. You can't hide what daylight is showing on your physique. So you have to be so critical. And like when we looked at my pictures, you're like, if there had been like shadows, my lower back would have looked in, but with the daylight, you could see those last, 1 or 2 pounds that we got off in the end. But for guys that are manipulating lighting to make their check-in photos look more favorable, they're only being delusional. So daylight is so harsh as a critic, but it'll keep you humble because then you'll know exactly how you look in like the worst lighting. Because if you look amazing in the worst lighting possible, when you go on stage, your physique is just going to be so much better from all the detailing that the shadow brings out.
Yeah. I think most guys are in true condition when they look leaner in the evening, even after all that food and water, than they do in the morning. And most guys will never reach that point. That's why all these funky protocols are there. Because in the evening they look watery, and they're like, "Oh shit, I need a diuretic, otherwise I'm not going to be lean the next day." But actually, if you're leaner in the evening, then you're in true condition, and you don't even need a mirror or fancy lighting to assist that. You could literally feel it on your lower back and chest and glutes. Where you just feel it in like, oh, it's thinner than this morning. But then it's paper thin, it's like this thin. But most guys don't get to that point. And I wish it was on my glutes like this, but it's not. I wish.
Even like the discussion of being flat on show day, people assume that, flatness on show day is a food problem. And most often it's a hydration issue, whether it's, sodium or water or both. Or you might require a small bit of fat in the instance of what John done in order to try and slow down metabolism or just keep you feeling satiated. But when you start adding diuretics into the mix either the night before, the morning of, or like some crazy coaches 4 days before the show, let's just keep taking a Diazide every 8 hours till show day. Unless you truly understand what happens from a physiological basis from your electrolytes when you introduce, even if it's a potassium-sparing diuretic like Diazides, more than likely you're going to wake up on show day flat from dehydration, not from food. So when you wake up and you take your pictures and all of a sudden you can't feel your muscles contract in terms like your chest, your delts, your biceps, or there's just not that pop to the physique. First instance, like what we talked about, is like the blueberry pancakes and insulin. Let's go load up in a buffet because I'm clearly flat. And it's like, no, in this instance, you probably need about a litre of fluid, wait an hour and see what happens to the physique.
Yeah, that's some salt packing.
That's it. And this is sort of a great thing that Justin Harris spoke about years ago, was using a glucometer on like show day. When you wake up in the morning, check your fasting blood glucose. When you wake up on show day, if your fasting blood glucose is elevated, above 100 or 5.5 UK terms, more than likely you're dehydrated and you need some water and maybe a little bit of sodium in order to push that glucose out of the bloodstream into your cells. And it gives you an insight into like a crude insight into your hydration.
It's funny how people misconstrued that back in the day. And I did as well, but people started using the glucometer to see when they would be full. Because my glucose is now coming up to 130. I'm full now. I can stop. Yeah. But I actually had to do with hydration. Poor guy.
Yeah, that's spongy look.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
It was a great piece of advice to assess how dehydrated you were. If your blood glucose is elevated, especially if you were someone who carb loaded the night before the show, which again is not something that you'd want to really do. More like you wake up the next morning, you're dehydrated. If your blood glucose is elevated, you probably didn't take in enough water and sodium to help that glucose transport. So your first instance on show day is to try and get rid of that glucose out of your bloodstream and address the dehydration rather than adding more food in, which is the first thought. And it goes back to, on show day, you probably need minimal food, but you need to pay attention to hydration, where, water or electrolytes or both.
Yeah, no constipation protocols. It's not the 90s anymore. Please.
That's the when you finally drink water again after the show, and you like get back home after your meal. You're like, holy shit! Like I'm exploding. Like I wish I did this on show day. It's like, oh, and then you think back, what did I just eat? Oh yeah, I ate that burger post show. It's like, no, man, you also drink a bunch of fluid. That was the point of it.
I remember one year competing. I've done the silly thing. We've all made our mistakes. This is how we're able to, speak from experience, where you cut show day fluids to as minimal as possible. And this year, the Irish national championships went on to like midnight. It was the first year they introduced bikini into the Irish competitive schedule, and there was like hundreds of bikini girls. And our finals for men's bodybuilding in the under 80 kilo class, so what's middleweight, I think. We didn't get on stage till like 11:45 at night for our finals. And I kept thinking, right, no water. Like you need to be dry, and you keep going until you get on stage. And I remember getting off stage, and my dad was one of the judges, so he was judging the show. When we were leaving to go back to the hotel, I started to drink, and all of a sudden I started to actually throw up. I could feel the water just sloshing around in my stomach because I'd gone past the point of, dehydration, where my body was like, what are you doing now, putting all this fluid into me in one go, rather than, slowly titrating the fluid back in after not having it for so long.
Scary.
Yeah, and it's
scary. Last thing I want to address. Yeah. Last thing I want to address is posing. It seems that a lot of people don't practice their posing, and then even if they're not dehydrated and fully, perfect electrolyte balance, they're still shaking like crazy. Now, John was not shaking at all, and Dean wasn't either on his shows. So how often do you pose, and what would you recommend for clients in general? Because I would tell people just to pose 3-4 times per day and do like 3 rounds at least.
Can I just say Sam Sulek at the Arnold was super impressive with his posing. He held all those poses flawlessly forever. When everyone else next to him was shaking, it was super impressive, especially from where he came from the previous show, where his posing was 100% on. But it makes a massive difference in your presentation.
Yeah, because he had a problem flexing his legs, and then he kind of fixed that. That's still not 100%, but on the second show, going pro.
Yeah, no, you look great.
You look great, so it's good. But yeah, I still see that problem with a lot of people that don't practice their posing, and then they get on stage and it's just a shake fest. So John, how much time do you spend in your posing room before the contest?
Yeah, well, this has tapered down over time, of course, like with experience. But my general guideline is, of course, posing is a skill and an art to present, but also a skill of having to be able to withstand the rounds. One of my friends, Daniel Coffeen, he made it's a videoless recording of Steve Weinberger doing call outs. And so I was like, this is genius. It's like you can play this recording and just listen to Steve do call outs, and Steve will hold you, right? So it's like, all right, if you can do 3 rounds with Steve doing the call outs, you're going to survive on stage. Which what I want to be able to do is every morning I'll just do 10 minutes straight posing, like I'm on stage. So this is going through quarter towns, through mandatories, which ends up being right around 3 to 4 rounds nonstop. Yeah. Transitions, everything nailed, perfect. If you can do that, you'll survive on stage. But I think you should be doing that at least twice per day, running into peak week and having that tapering up across your prep. So when you start in prep, you should already having posing taking place, and that factored in to your output for the day. Because I see this also becomes an issue later on in prep. It's like you're racing your prep now. There's more cardio, you need more posing, or posing just doesn't even happen. So what I like to do is like now posing's coming in more, that output side can decrease some. And the last thing that I want to leave with too is in peak week, you should be tapering your posing down. I've had clients call me like, oh, my posing coach is coming by. We're going to run through a 30-minute session. A 30-minute posing session, like one day out, like what the hell you're going to figure out right now? It's like, you should have your posing done you know? So
Yes.
on one day out, like you take your picks and that's it. Like you don't do rounds of posing. So on during peak week, like man, posing's way tapered down. It's just basically for check-in picks because I already know what to do. So leading up with the peak that you should get up to, if you can do 3 10-minute rounds, like throughout the day, right? Like morning, maybe post training, maybe in the evening, and lead that into your peak week, like you should be in really good shape to be able to pose on stage correctly.
Yeah, it's 30 minutes in total, and that's more than you'll get on stage. So that's
Don't
ultimately
go
where
longer. Like
Yeah.
these 30-minute, 1-hour posing sessions, to me, that's ridiculous. I also think it's ridiculous when you have a posing coach for an hour and he's like critiquing every single pose with all these different cues. Like, man, to retain information on prep, like you're posing with the coach could be like 15 minutes. Give some cues. There's your homework. Go learn it. Come back. Here's a couple cues for a pose.
Yeah.
Go learn it. An hour session of critiquing someone pose, like get a new posing coach. Like that stuff just drives me up the wall. It's my pet peeve. that
You're putting a lot of people out of business now. What the fuck?
and posing during training. Fuck, I hate it. Like fully clothed and they're like posing in the gym. Like, what are you looking at right now? I'm squeezing the detail. Like, no, fucking wasting energy.
Shots fired. But it's okay. That coach is retired now.
So anyway.
Yeah. No, it's posing is severely underdone or overdone.
Yeah.
From what I see.
Yeah. Breathing is extremely important, obviously. And having a breathing strategy while you're on stage, a lot of people don't consider that. And I've always been super conscientious of my waist, and because you're looked at every single moment. So understanding when you should be breathing, pacing yourself on stage to where you can replicate, like during your training, your posing, you do that exact same thing on stage. So we're doing a caught, doing like, deep breathing with your waist and moving your diaphragm too much. So like just controlling your breathing, be able to pace out and learning that piece of it is huge and takes practice because you can't just white knuckle your posing the whole time. You will gas out, especially if you're nervous, you're hyped up, you start hitting your poses harder, you start doing the things you wouldn't do during your posing practice. And all of a sudden that's when you see the guy now huffing and puffing on stage, shaking during posing because you're now doing things that you should not be doing. So, understanding how to breathe, like, hey, I have to blow all my air out for a vacuum and hold it. What do I do if I'm running out of air? Like, what do you transition? How do you regain your breath? These are all things that you need to learn and master. So when you get to show day, it's like, it's cakewalk.
Yeah.